constraint. The other confession I must make is that I'm so awed by the quality of work the previous speakers have spoken about and what they do that I feel quite humbled and inadequate standing in front of you going to be speaking about a subject which is more at a stratospheric level. I'm going to, having heard the speakers, have actually changed my mind on what I'm going to speak about. I had earlier decided to speak on a subject which I could normally speak in my sleep, which is India-Pakistan relations, but I decided instead to think out of the box and talk to you about the need for India to reevaluate its relationships with various parts of the world, particularly the neighborhood, and more importantly for India, the establishment to look at what we could really do in terms of our engagement with our neighborhood in particular. Do we need to continue to live by old paradigms? Do we need to continue to hammer away at old issues, or do we need to look afresh at what models should be available to us and our policymakers? Policymakers, by the very nature of the role they play, do not often have the liberty, and though I must admit they're very well informed, but for a variety of reasons, they don't want to steer away from the established course. So let me give you a little sort of background to where India and its foreign policy and its positioning in the world today is. Most of us are familiar with old established truths that Pakistan is a major enemy. China could attack us any other day. America is trying to hoodwink us into a relationship and take on the burden of managing the world with the United States, at least parts of Asia. And the Arab world will continue to dominate the scheme of things in terms of our energy security. Southeast Asia is an area which isn't important enough. Russia is an old friend, and Europe must be watched before it gets its act together, at least EU gets itself together. So those are the old issues which continue to dominate thinking in South Bloc. Is there an opportunity for us as a nation to think out of the box? I believe there is. Let's start with Pakistan first. The first point to understand is that the relationship with Pakistan, which has been established over the last 64 years, has come about primarily because Pakistan felt at the time of independence and partition that it emerged into an order with India with huge disadvantages in terms of size, in terms of military ratio. I mean, one of the reasons Pakistan's army became a very important force in Pakistani politics is because of the military imbalance between India and Pakistan, and they felt they needed to have the reins in their hand to make Pakistan secure, and therefore created this mindset in the Pakistani public that they are the saviors of their nation against a potential aggressor, that's India. More importantly, the relationship with Pakistan over the last 4 decades emerged into India reacting and not really having a policy. I once asked the former foreign secretary, could he explain India's foreign policy to me? And the response was that we don't have a foreign policy. We just react to situations as and when they emerge, and hope like hell our silk ties and our wine drinking skills will get us past the crisis there is. Now that's not the approach that a nation of our size should have. Forget our place in the world order, but just look at our size. 1/6 of humanity in terms of citizens. In terms of our GDP, if you look at it in terms of PPP, we've got a GDP today which is about $4 trillion, and another 10 years down the line it will be about anything in the range of $10 to $20 trillion, which will probably, by one estimate, make us probably the most powerful economy in the world, if not at least in the second or third place. Either way, an economy worth reckoning. So with that kind of an economic clout, do we need to still react to situations? I believe we don't. I believe India needs to think out of the box. For one, give Pakistan its own space. If you don't threaten Pakistan, Pakistan's anti-Indianism will decrease. Kashmir will continue to be a binding adhesive for Pakistan till their leaders create and other institutions that they feel more proud of. But certainly our over-exuberance in getting involved in Afghanistan, which Pakistan feels as an article of faith is their strategic hinterland, and they want the depth there, would do us well to extricate somewhat from Afghanistan. And if we have extra money to give away, as we seem to have, we put in $2 billion in Afghanistan, we would have done better by putting that money into Bangladesh and Nepal and probably win more sympathy from them, or at least a greater degree of warmth and comfort, and have our immediate neighborhood sorted out. There are other projects with Bangladesh. There is a need for an energy relationship with Bangladesh which we have never explored sufficiently. Nepal has waterways which we can jointly exploit to give them electricity and an economic clout vis-a-vis us and our states adjoining Nepal. Bhutan has immense hydropower which we have never exploited. Sri Lanka needs a connecting electricity grid from India, which there is a reluctance to establish, and puts Sri Lanka into the Asian grid connectivity. Sri Lanka extended to India a visitor's visa on arrival, but we failed to extend that to Sri Lanka, and therefore I believe they've already withdrawn that facility, or they are looking at withdrawing it. There are other benefits that we can get by building relationships with our neighborhood. There has always been that emphasis in our foreign office to try and play at the big stakes and play at the international capitals and be on the high table instead of securing our neighborhood. An American diplomat once asked me, years ago in America, at the foreign office in Foggy Bottom, that you guys keep asking for a seat in the UN Security Council, but tell me how many countries in your neighborhood will vote for you. And it really got me thinking, that's in a way true, that we need to build our relationships with our neighborhood. It's a neglected area of India's relationship with the world. We react to Pakistan when there is a 26/11 attack. Subsequently, you have a Prime Minister who initiates talks with Pakistan despite public opinion not being completely in favor of it. And talking to a Prime Minister in Pakistan who's probably fourth in the hierarchy, if not third. The army chief and president are higher than him. So the pointed issue is that there is an inability to understand the dynamics of those people we should be dealing with. Southeast Asia is living under the fear of the shadow of China's dominance. We've done very little about it after Narasimha Rao got our Look East policy going in the mid-90s. And then we looked east and then again looked west. So the point is that we need to engage in the relationship with countries in our neighborhood which have potential. If you look at India, if you look at the map of Asia, if you were outside the world and on a spaceship, India would stick out in Asia as more or less a central point. Now, if we are there, who all we should be engaging with? We should be immediately engaging our neighbors. We should then go on to the second tier of our relationship, which is build up a relationship with Southeast Asia. And there are a number of countries which are sympathetically inclined from the Indian point of view. There is this Arab world, but we've been kind of one step forward, one step back with the Arab world. And we have to explain, as I said, to many sensitive Arabs in a very insensitive way, unfortunately, in one of my talks in Oman to the Foreign Policy Institute. And they said, well, you call yourself a friend of India, but why are you sort of engaging with Israel? I said, because your chief patron also engages with Israel, which is the United States. So they had no answer to that, because if the US can do it, they don't mind. But if India did that relationship with Israel, then the Arabs have a problem. So I think we've got to talk straight with them. And once we do that, we have our energy security sorted out with the Arab world. At the same time, we have a trade relationship with Southeast Asia sorted out. And once that is done, then India can look afresh into its own engagement with the bigger platform, that is the United Nations. And if India continues to hold the same vote, pardon my saying so, with no disrespect, as Fiji Islands and Seychelles in the United Nations, because we're a member of the General Assembly, and we're only a temporary member of the Security Council. So if we have the same vote as two small island countries, then we need to ask ourselves, is it worth continuing in the UN, or is it worth stepping off and being like Switzerland, that you're not part of the UN, but every UN agency has its office there. We need to carve our own space. For too long we've been told by the international community what to do. There is one other country in our neighborhood which I haven't addressed, which is China. How do we deal with China? I often come across this question from people that when is China going to roll down the Indian northeastern plains again? The reasons are that China looks at its relationship with the world in economic terms. In the radar screen of Beijing, India doesn't really figure, except as a blip once in a while, when we get Dalai Lama to host a talk somewhere, right? We are one of their principal trading partners, and the trade balance is hugely tilted in their favor. So one way of extracting a concession from them is not to pull out the Dalai Lama card and think that is your trump card, because really China sees it as an irritant, particularly when His Excellency himself His Holiness, has himself said that, the relationship that Tibet had with Beijing in the 50s and what it is now, I'm paraphrasing, the equation has changed completely. So what we need to do is, we need to look at real politics in dealing with Beijing. Remember, there is a country in our neighborhood where we've again been very slow off the blocks in establishing arrangements, and that is Burma. China has just built a $23 billion tunnel from Burma, linking it to the central Chinese province, so that China has access to the ports of Bay of Bengal, just like China has built the Gwadar port in west coastal areas of Pakistan, west of Karachi, completely paid for. So we've got two huge Chinese ports on either side of our borders, and in both of them, what China is really keen to do is to guard its own energy security, its own trade interests. So if China is looking at its interests, do we have the opportunity to leverage with the countries? I think with Pakistan, it's a no-winner, but with Burma, certainly there have been opportunities which we have squandered in the past. There is the opportunity of importing gas from Burma, which again our ministries are dilly-dallying over, just like we were offered by the Sri Lankans to build the port at Sri Lanka, Hamba Bota, I think is the name, and we missed that opportunity, so China went and built a port in Sri Lanka. Having access to all the sea routes, guarding its own energy security needs, while our diplomats are trying to wrangle the next posting to Washington or London. Now that is the tragedy of Indian diplomacy, and that needs to be revisited. That India needs to relook at its entire arrangement with the world, with special concessions, I personally believe, that could give Pakistan some kind of strategic space to play the game. And that to me lies in Afghanistan. I have often argued that Pakistan in another part of the world would have been a major regional player. It is the 7th largest nation in the world. It has sufficient military capability. It now has the nuclear capability, and therefore it needs space. But it is like a dam of water, which has, the water is building up, and the water is a lot, if it tasted, it doesn't taste friendly to India. But that water which is building up needs an exit. We are not allowing that an exit. Unless you allow it space to maneuver its energies towards, it will continue to knock on your door. And where there are cracks in our system, as there were on the line of control, it would trickle in the form of jihadis. So therefore, you need to look at providing them the space. And that is the final point I wish to make in terms of our military balance with Pakistan. which would then unsettle the military in Pakistan from being such a dominant policy maker, which in turn cultivates proxy war agents to threaten India by 1,000 cuts. What we need to do is, instead of giving in to the demand of our armed forces, of giving the boys more toys in terms of more aircraft, guns, missiles, we need to relook and revisit how much is the minimum that we need for our security. And if we apply that rationale, then you would realize that you don't need another 126 fighter aircraft for the mother of aircraft deal which the Air Force is likely to sign very soon with one of the European providers, either the Eurojet or the Eurofighter or the Rafale. But you need much lesser numbers just to work as a strategic deterrent. So there is a concept in defense which is known as defensive defense or non-offensive defense. And if you apply that, the first thing that you take away from Pakistan's arsenal is the argument that India is threatening us. And use those funds available to fortify your country against potential terror attacks, because terror attacks from jihadi groups are not behind us. 26/11 was a warning of possible similar attacks to come, simply because those jihadis, and as happens with Frankenstein monsters anywhere in the world, when you create them, beyond the point of time they go out of hand. So they've gone out of the control of the mentors in Pakistan, that's the military, and they are looking to continue to be in business, and the business comes from attacking India. So if you revisit your whole strategic relationship with your neighbors, with your militarization, with what to do with your extended neighborhood, the rest of the world will relook at you differently. Thank you very much.